Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington, and we begin with the search for Nancy Guthrie, the mother of our friend and colleague Savannah Guthrie. It's now been more than 2 weeks since her disappearance, and moments ago, we just got a new statement from the Pima County Sheriff saying that the Guthrie family, including all siblings and spouses, have been cleared as possible suspects in this case. The sheriff goes on to say that the family are victims, and to suggest otherwise is not only wrong, but cruel. This all comes after the Guthrie family is saying it is not giving up hope. Savannah last night posting this video on social media, pleading for answers.
I wanted to come on, and it's been 2 weeks since our mom was taken, and I just wanted to come on and say that we still have hope, and we still believe. And I wanted to say to whoever has her or knows where she is that it's never too late. And you're not lost or alone. And it is never too late to do the right thing.
Investigators continue to dig into new leads, but still have no suspects and have not narrowed down a theory of the case. And they're still searching for a suspect who was captured in that chilling video on Guthrie's doorbell camera the night she disappeared. The video shows a man who the FBI says is 5'9" to 5'10", wearing a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker backpack and armed with a gun. The FBI tells NBC News it recovered a glove about 2 miles from Guthrie's home that's consistent with the type of glove the suspect was wearing in the doorbell video. The FBI says DNA from that glove belongs to an unknown man. Meanwhile, the Sheriff's Department says DNA that is not Nancy's or those in close contact with her was collected from her property. And over the weekend, authorities conducted a search involving SWAT units at a property in Tucson. During that operation, a Range Rover SUV was towed by officials, but those searches did not lead to any arrests. Meanwhile, according to the New York Post, President Trump today saying in a phone interview that the Justice Department would seek the death penalty if Nancy Guthrie is not returned alive. Now, our team is across every angle here. NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell and NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch are both in Tucson for us. And we're also joined by Andy Black, a former FBI Assistant Special Agent in charge for the Tucson office. Thank you all so much for joining me. Kelly, I want to start with you. And this new statement from the Sheriff's Office, what more can you tell us?
Well, this is coming to us at a time when we have been trying to be very careful about the reporting here. And our reporting at NBC News, our colleagues who've been working this, had been that investigators were turning away from anyone in the family and the individuals that had been the subjects of searches in recent days. What stands out about this statement from the sheriff is it is really a very loud and clear message, not only to the public who's simply following this story, but to those who are online opining, those who are in kind of the wider media space, which involves a lot of true crime or bloggers, that kind of universe where there's been a lot of speculation. Now, why does that kind of speculation exist? In many crimes, those closest to the person who is the subject can be a part of the investigation. That is typical, and there is usually a period where they review not only the whereabouts of family, but also financial records, phone records, all that kind of data. And in this case, the Pima County Sheriff is saying that Savannah Guthrie, her siblings, their spouses, the immediate family of Mrs. Guthrie is not considered a suspect or in any way involved in her disappearance. That may bring great comfort to the family, obviously, and the sheriff goes further and says that it is really cruel to extend these theories or comments without evidence. And so this is, in some ways, kind of reflective of the personality of the sheriff we've seen, where he has been the kind of person who has spoken with a lot of heart and empathy, at times criticized for the way he describes the case. But in this instance, where they're going into the statement where they say, The family has been nothing but cooperative and gracious. They are victims in this case. To suggest otherwise is not only wrong, it is cruel. The Guthrie families are victims, plain and simple. And he goes on to beg those who are communicating, whether it's social media or traditional media, to heed his words. So this is, in many ways, a significant development in the case. Typically, until there is an understanding of the crime, no one is fully cleared. But in this case, they've done the work behind the scenes. They feel confident in putting this out. And we've seen it in other very high-profile cases where the family of the person who is missing is the first area they look at, and then often they're able to publicly clear them because they, of course, are going through an ordeal that none of us can fully imagine. And in this case, we know the Guthries, and so I'm sure this brings additional comfort. But it also brings the weight of the Pima County Sheriff's Office saying that the family has been cooperative, they've been checked out, and they are not involved in this case. Gabe?
Kelly, thank you for bringing up to speed on that statement. Again, coming out just moments ago. I also want to ask you about searches in the Tucson area over the weekend. What more do we know about those operations, and where do they leave the overall investigation?
Well, they were certainly eye-catching operations. Authorities went in with a lot of resources, and they executed court-approved searches. So that meant they had a lead where they had some evidence to suggest a probable cause to pursue the location and the individuals attached. And then what they have told us is that after doing that, there is not actionable information to lead to being detained or questioned further, and no charges have been filed. And so we put those off to the side. Now, sometimes in cases, that is just a first step, and they might still consider those individuals to be persons of interest. We're being told that is not the case here. And so it is, in many ways, it is the work of following leads, getting tips, doing the investigative work, which can include things like descriptions of vehicles or was someone in the area or any of those array of things. And they work through it, and then they move on to the next. And so that's the phase we're in right now. We have not seen any large-scale searches since Friday night, and we are told by investigators that they're doing the work. There's a lot going on in the command center and behind the scenes in a few different lanes. Digital review, the cell phone data, which is the CAST team of the FBI, leads and tips. There have been more than 30,000 now to the Pima County Sheriff's and the FBI. That's just an enormous volume. And someone has to go through and sort of discern, is this a tip we should move on? Is this a tip that's lower priority? So a lot of work, Gabe.
Yeah, certainly a lot to sift through there. And Kelly, the president today, as we mentioned, he suggested in a brief interview with the New York Post that the DOJ would seek the death penalty if Nancy is not found alive. But do we even know if this would be a federal case?
At this point, no. And, you know, you and I cover the president a lot and understand that he often offers his opinions on matters of national interest. In this case, what we know about the facts related to Mrs. Guthrie's disappearance, it is a state case. Unless or until that changes, the president would not have direct influence over this. And he's, of course, opining about events that are not yet known. And it is the president, I think, being engaged on this topic. He has spoken to Savannah Guthrie. He has expressed his concern. I've been told, as I know you have, that he is following updates. But on the specific of this, it is not yet a federal case, if it ever becomes one. And then at that point, he'd have to weigh if it's appropriate for the president to have any say on what happens next. So it's a bit premature, but it does seem to be indicative of the president's interest in the Guthrie case, like so many Americans.
Kelly O'Donnell live for us in Tucson. Kelly, thank you for your reporting and your expertise. I want to switch over to Jesse Kirsch, also in Tucson for us. And Jesse, there has been an outpouring of support for Nancy, not just across the community, but really across the country. How is that community rallying around this search now?
Yeah, and a lot of that, Gabe, centered right here behind me outside of Nancy Guthrie's home. You can see this collection of yellow flowers. There are yellow ribbons, not just at her driveway front, but also across this neighborhood. And Kelly actually was the first to report on this for us on the Today Show last week. And I spoke with a woman in South Carolina who says she saw Kelly's story, was inspired by that, and tied a ribbon in her own yard again, in South Carolina, about 2,000 miles away from here. So this is something that we're not just seeing in parts of Tucson, but across the country, and people weighing in on social media saying they're chiming in from California, from Texas, from Arkansas, from all over. And there's this banner, which you see right there at our affiliate here in Tucson, KVOA. It says, "Bring her home," and people have been signing that banner for days. And we went over there over the weekend, and you can see some of the entries, people saying they're signing from Minnesota, from Florida, from Michigan, Ohio, New Mexico, Arizona, of course, where we are right now, and even someone saying they were signing from Fairbanks, Alaska. Of course, we don't know if these are people visiting, people who live here part-time or have moved here and just have ties to those communities, but it just speaks to people all across the United States with connections all over the United States expressing their support for the Guthrie family right now. And I think it also just speaks to the impact Savannah, of course, has had over her years at NBC News.
Jesse Kurtz reporting for us also in Tucson. Jesse, thank you. I want to turn now to Andy Black, again, the former FBI Assistant Special in Charge for the Tucson office. Andy, thank you for your expertise as well. I want to start off with that glove we mentioned. The authorities have been saying that it could be consistent with the one worn by the suspect in that doorbell video. Do you think it could generate a lead in this investigation, or what are your main questions about that glove? From what we understand, it was found about 2 miles away from the home. How realistic is it that this could be a huge break in the case?
Well, you never know where you're going to get the best break in a case. You have to follow this lead because they have determined that it resembles and may be the same type of glove that the offender used at the Guthrie residence. So you have to temper your expectations. That glove has been outdoors, so that tends to degrade the quality of the DNA sample, but doesn't exclude it from being properly profiled. So that any DNA gathered from that glove or from inside the house will be sent to the lab. A DNA profile will be generated, and it'll be put into the CODIS system. It's the database, it's the combined DNA index system managed by the FBI. It's the largest repository of DNA profiles in the world. And they'll compare that profile against over 20 million known individuals. They can also check that profile against a public database of DNA profiles. And if they elect to, they can also reach out to private companies that gather DNA to gather a genealogy.
And Andy, on that, on the point about that database, the CODIS database, how long could it take to get those results back? And you kind of got at this at some of the limitations. What are the limitations here? If you're not a criminal, your DNA wouldn't be in that database, right? Or you mentioned something about private databases as well. What are the limitations here?
Limitations deal with the quality of the DNA sample that you submit. If it's a high quality sample, it can be turned around in a matter of hours or a day. If it's degraded because of elements or cleaning solutions, doesn't negate it. But it could take longer. It could take days or weeks in order to develop a meaningful profile. What's critical is if you're not in one of those databases, maybe a family member is. It could be one that submitted DNA in a public database as part of the genealogy. So many cases have been made because of relatives being identified, which narrows the search for the investigators in crimes like this.
Yeah, and our reporting says that this is one of 16 gloves that were found recently in the area. Obviously, a lot of gloves. A lot of those have been ruled out as gloves that came from investigators themselves that were discarded. What is the proper protocol here to, when you have that, that much evidence, similar looking evidence perhaps, in and around that crime scene?
From what I understand, they eliminated most of the gloves as not being similar to the one or identifying where they came from, workers in the area. This one, they feel confident it's similar, if not identical. Doesn't mean it's the same one that was on the hands of the offender at the Guthrie residence, but it's a really solid lead. You have to find out. You have to follow up on it. Hopefully this is something that could break the case. You have to follow up on something like this.
Andy Black, thank you for your expertise. We really appreciate it. And we will continue to follow this story very closely. We'll bring you any major updates as we get them. And a reminder as well, if you have any information at all that could be helpful for investigators, please call the number on your screen right now. That's 1-800-CALL-FBI. And turning now to some breaking news out of Rhode Island, where a shooting took place at a Pawtucket ice rink this afternoon. Our NBC affiliate WJAR reporting that, according to the mayor's office there, a young girl was killed and 4 others injured, and that the shooter is also dead. Governor Dan McKee says state police are working with local law enforcement, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives is urging the public to avoid the area as they assist authorities. We'll keep our eye on this and bring you any developments as we get them. Now coming up, closing time. We're once again in the midst of a partial government shutdown, and Congress seems to be in no rush to fix this one, with both sides digging in. Plus, high-profile poisoning. New allegations that Alexei Navalny was killed by a rare toxin derived from an Ecuadorian dart frog 2 years after the Russian opposition leader died in a Siberian prison. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. And welcome back. For the third time since President Trump's second term began, the U.S. government is partially shut down. We're now in day 3 of this latest shutdown after Congress failed to reach a deal to fund the Department of Homeland Security. Democrats are demanding reforms to Immigration and Customs Enforcement after 2 American citizens were shot and killed by federal agents in Minneapolis. Right now, there appears to be no hope for a quick resolution, as Democrats say they are not backing down.
We need masks off, we need cameras on, and we need every ICE officer to be identified. Jake, these are common sense proposals. They're supported by the American people. Why won't Republicans go for them?
Well, we're willing to have a good faith conversation about everything, but fundamentally, we need change that is dramatic.
Well, Republicans don't appear to be feeling much pressure to compromise either.
As far as unmasking ICE agents, I could also know probably not, because many of those are involved in undercover operations and you don't want to put them in danger. But there are a lot of things that we could probably sit down and negotiate on. But the problem is that, look, ICE is funded through 2028. And so there's really nothing here, no pressure to do something about ICE, because ICE is funded.
They're not stopping ICE from doing their job. They're not stopping the Border Patrol from doing their job. All this is a political theater because of the State of the Union that's coming up a week from Tuesday.
And as you just heard, ICE will continue to be funded thanks to President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill. Still, though, a slew of other agencies under DHS could, like FEMA, the Coast Guard, and the TSA, they could bear the brunt of yet another shutdown. Just listen to what one TSA officer told us.
Instead of us focusing 100% on national security, we're having to focus on where our next paycheck is going to come from, how are we going to feed our families, and so that's it's very stressful.
And joining me now here on set is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Mel Zanona. Mel, it's so good to have you here. Look, lawmakers seem pretty dug in here. Republicans are arguing that Democrats have no leverage. What is the Democrats' strategy right now?
Well, they do have some leverage because they are in the minority, but they do need votes from Democrats in the Senate. So they really view an opportunity here to extract some real concessions when it comes to ICE reforms in exchange for funding the Department of Homeland Security. And they feel buoyed by the fact not only is there recent immigration polling showing the numbers are on their side, but also the president himself said we need to have a lighter touch when it comes to immigration. But Gabe, you probably know this too in talking to the White House. They feel like there has been enough time and space since those shootings that things have calmed down in Minnesota, and that there is a little less public pressure on them to potentially cave on some of these issues. So it's really going to come down to whether they can reach a compromise. But as of right now, very little sense of urgency with Congress not even here.
Yeah, the urgency. Well, we just heard Carlos Jimenez there saying that, look, masks seem to be a red line here, but what about body cameras? I know some federal agents are already wearing them, but are there any signs that there could be some compromise on other issues, perhaps other than masks?
Body camera seems to be the #1 area of compromise. And interestingly, though, Republicans have been much more vocal about where they aren't willing to compromise. So you can kind of figure out what a deal would look like by the process of elimination. And some of those sticking points, #1, masks. That's the huge red line for Republicans. They don't want ICE agents to be showing their faces because they're worried about them being doxxed, despite the fact that normal law enforcement doesn't wear masks every day. And the second sticking point is judicial warrants for ICE arrests. That is something that Senate GOP leader John Thune said is a really big problem for some of his members. So it's really, again, going to come down to how much is each side willing to cave.
Right, and Republicans arguing it's political theater ahead of the State of the Union next week. How big is that in the Democrats' thinking here? Do they want to get maximum attention here by bringing up this issue, especially with Congress in recess this week, ahead of the State of the Union? Does this all dissipate once the State of the Union happens?
I'm sure that President Trump is going to be bringing this up at the State of the Union if there is still a shutdown during his address, which at this point it looks like there will be. But Democrats, like I said, they feel like they have momentum on their side, so they don't have a problem calling attention to what they say are these major, major issues with ICE and reminding the public back at home why they're fighting for some of these reforms in the first place.
Mel Zanona, Capitol Hill correspondent, here with me on set. Mel, thank you. And joining me now is Nebraska Republican Congressman Don Bacon. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. I want to pick up right now where we left off with Mel. How do you see this DHS shutdown ending?
I do think we can find one or two areas that we can agree on. I think body cameras is probably the easiest one. And I think we should try to find the low-hanging fruit that we can agree on, because the shutdown, it doesn't hurt ICE. Right now, I find this ironic. The Democrats are mad at ICE, Border Patrol. They're both largely funded already. So who's going to pay the price here is FEMA, TSA that protects us at the airports, Secret Service, the Coast Guard, CISA that protects us against cyber attacks from China and Russia. These agencies need to be funded. But instead of playing hardball, I think we should look, what are one or two areas that we can agree on? And I think body cameras is clearly one of most law enforcement agencies all over the country already have those. So that seems like an easy one. And if there's something else that maybe we could agree to, I would call that governing.
Well, look, the administration has already softened on body cameras a bit. A short time ago, they said that federal agents in Minneapolis, at least some of them, would wear body cameras. But what about one of the other issues that Mel brought up, this issue of judicial warrants before ICE agents make arrests inside homes? How do you come down on that? And do you think that Republicans would budge at all on that?
I think if you're going to search a home, you have to have a warrant. I think that's in the Constitution. However, if someone, police have made arrests at people's doors that are citizens if they're guilty of a crime, and so I think the one size fits all here. If you need it for citizens, I think you got to have a warrant to search somebody's house. But I've seen people arrested in front of their homes, without a warrant. Right. So I'm not a lawyer, but we'll let the legal guys take care of this. But I think body cameras are an easy one.
And quickly, because I do want to perhaps talk specifics here, what about the universal code of conduct that Democrats have been asking for when it comes to ICE operations? Do you support that, or would you be willing to compromise on that?
Should be standard law enforcement practices. I know the Omaha police here, I think, do a great job. So there should be a standard processes for law enforcement. I do think Holman has done a good job in Minneapolis. He came in there. I think he turned down the heat, turned down the volume. And it's probably good, because I think it's always bad when you have Americans pitted against Americans. You see violence in the streets. I think some of the stuff that was done in Minneapolis was unnecessary. And it takes leadership. And I think Director Holman's the guy to do it. So I applaud him coming in there and creating some stability. And so it's really more about leadership than anything else.
Well, Congressman, even if Republicans feel like they have more leverage than Democrats here when it comes to a shutdown, do you have any concern that your party is taking a hit on this issue of immigration ahead of the midterms?
I do think there's a divide in our country on if you have someone here illegally, say for 5 years, and they're working, they have a family here, they're otherwise here illegally, being good neighbors. Our country's divided on that. And I think our own party, and the Republican Party, is divided on it. We have some that would want to deport anyone who came here illegally. I'm of the view that if you're a gang member or have done other kinds of crimes, surely we need to deport those people. But I do think it's a worthy debate how we can reform and make changes to the current laws. I support the Dignity Act, because I think someone who's been here for a while is working, taking care of their family, otherwise here illegally, they should pay a fine. They should never become a citizen, but they should be able to get a legal status where they can continue contributing to the country and their family and not worry about being deported. Now, will my legislation make it through that I support? I don't know. But we should have this debate. I think most Americans are where I'm at. They'd like a little bit of humanity here to go along with, law enforcement. Surely we all want to secure our border. It's a harder issue dealing with the 20 million people who are here right now illegally.
Well, Congressman, certainly that debate will be had over the next few months ahead of the midterms. I want to turn to tariffs now. You voted against a rule that would prevent the House from overturning President Trump's tariffs, saying that Congress needs to be able to debate them. Now, the president has said that any Republican who votes against tariffs will, quote, suffer the consequences in elections. Now, I know you're retiring, but do you worry those kinds of threats have a chilling effect on others in your party?
I've taken tough votes way before retiring. I've had contested elections for the last 10 years. Four of those were primaries. The president's been against me on it, in 2022. I encourage everybody, vote your conscience and vote what is best for the country and what is best for your district. And I also think, first of all, Article 1 says it's Congress's authority. It's our role to determine tariffs and taxes. We should not pass the buck there. We should fight to protect this authority. Secondly, I argue about the economics. I mean, we saw data last week. The average family is paying $1,000 in tariffs, and 95% of the tariffs are paid by the American consumer. That's the numbers that came out last week. And this is why we should debate it. Now, I fully support it. If we have a vote and people vote in support of the president, I respect the final results, but we should debate it, and we should be able to put this on the floor, debate the pros and cons, and do what Article 1 in the Constitution asks us to do. Now, I will tell you, tariffs are not popular in Omaha. I'm all over this district. I talk to businesses, large and small, and they're greatly affected right now by these tariffs. I've seen production lines, some of our factories being moved overseas, and that's why I'm standing up on this. Most Republicans will support tariffs if they're clearly reciprocal against a country that is being unfair. The sense of it is that is not being done now. 80 countries with tariffs at an average of 20%. And many of these tariffs have been done in I would say in a very capricious way, going after a leader in Switzerland because the president doesn't like her tone, or going after European countries because they oppose the president's comments on Greenland. That's what we don't like.
And Congressman, we're seeing a historic number of House retirements this year, including 30 Republicans. Now, the current GOP margin is already incredibly narrow. What do you think this could all mean for the midterms?
Typically, midterms go poorly for the party in power. Only twice in the last century, I believe, has that been different. And so the historical side is not good. And that's why I would encourage the president, talk about how wages are climbing faster than inflation for the first time in 5 years, how gas prices are low. He does this once in a while, but then he gets diverted with Greenland or going after people's spouses. He's all over the map. He needs to focus on affordability, and then he did what he promised. He secured the border. If he would stay in what I would call what got him elected, it would be better for him and all the Republicans down ballot. But right now we're defending tariffs, Greenland. We're keeping a dictator in power in Venezuela. These are things that I don't think fare well for Republicans. But they're the most important issues are economic. Right. And if he made the case, I think he would have a lot of support. It would help us down ballot.
Congressman Don Bacon, Republican on Nebraska. We're out of time, but I wonder how many of your Republican colleagues think the way you do, just haven't said so publicly. We appreciate your time today here on Meet the Press Now. All right, up next, foreign friction. As the U.S. prepares for high-stakes talks on Iran's nuclear program and the Russia-Ukraine war, Secretary of State Marco Rubio proclaims a golden age of U.S. relations with a European strongman closely allied with President Putin. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. Over the weekend, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio delivered a closely watched speech at the annual Munich Security Conference, receiving a standing ovation while speaking about the need for the U.S. and Europe to work together and strengthen its partnerships and alliances. That, of course, comes amid growing tensions between Washington and Europe as President Trump continues to criticize the NATO alliance and insists the U.S. must own Greenland, a territory of Denmark. But despite the more diplomatic tone by Secretary Rubio, some of the themes in his speech echoed the message delivered by Vice President J.D. Vance at the same forum a year ago, including his warning about mass migration.
We must also gain control of our national borders. Controlling who and how many people enter our countries, this is not an expression of xenophobia. It is not hate. It is a fundamental act of national sovereignty. And the failure to do so is not just an abdication of one of our most basic duties owed to our people. It is an urgent threat to the fabric of our societies and the survival of our civilization itself.
Joining me now is NBC News Chief Washington Correspondent and Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell, as well as NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons. Thank you so much for joining me. Andrea, I want to start with you. You were in the room for that speech that Rubio gave. Look, and we mentioned that his tone was different than J.D. Vance last year. However, did the Europeans buy it?
He got a standing ovation, and the chair of the conference said, "Thank you. That was so reassuring. You've reassured us with your, with your speech." That said, afterwards, the other world leaders gave speeches saying that it was the same message, basically, as J.D. Vance. The general reaction, I talked to a lot of Europeans, the leaders, the foreign ministers, and senators, mostly the Democrats, who were critical. And these are Democrats who had worked closely with Rubio, and they view him as the best figure, the most, I should say, constructive to internationalism, diplomatic in the cabinet. But they were very critical because they said this is J.D. Vance's speech, just dressed up in better language, because he also called climate a cult. He criticized, all aspects of Western civilization, praising the civilization, but left out the whole global South, left out by criticizing immigration. So left out Africa.
This was seen as trying to smooth things over with the European by some. Is the administration, do they really care about smoothing things over with the Europeans?
Well, he said, we want to work with you. We are, we are, so closely related to you. But at the same time, he said, do it our way or the highway. It was basically the bottom message, the bottom line that they took from it. And so overall, it was negative. And he skipped the meeting with Zelensky that they all attended. Just did a quick drive-by with him, not even a bilateral meeting. So there were other signals that he was not interested in working with them.
Well, speaking of Zelensky and Ukraine, today Secretary Rubio met with Viktor Orban of Hungary, seen as an ally of Putin. How do we expect that meeting to be received in Europe and also by Ukraine?
Well, that was another signal, because he went from Munich to, go to Central Europe and to go to Orban. And a very cozy meeting it was. A big reception, understandably. Orban has appeared at the Conservative, Action Group, the annual conference here with Trump, very Trumpy, Putin ally. And that was certainly a rejection of the rest of Europe. And so they feel that they've got to step up. The problem has been that the EU takes so long to decide things that despite their criticism, there are 27 members who have not agreed on anything, including unfreezing the Russian assets that are needed, hundreds of millions of dollars that could be helping Ukraine. So they've got their own problems.
Andrea Mitchell, thank you so much for joining me here. I want to turn now to Keir Simmons. Keir, let's look ahead to the talks that are set to take place in Geneva tomorrow, starting with the meeting with Iran's foreign minister. And this all comes as the president announced on Friday that there's a second U.S. aircraft carrier heading to the Middle East. So what can we expect from this second round of talks with Tehran?
Well, it's striking, isn't it, that the talks are taking place in Geneva, the talks between Iran and the US and the talks between Russia and Ukraine, both in the same city at the same time, says something about this moment in diplomacy by the Trump administration. And at the same time, Andrea used the phrase, our way or the highway. That's, I think, the message that the Trump administration is sending to Iran with those two aircraft carriers, Gabe, in the region, one of them just about to arrive, the USS Ford. There is an enormous amount of US capability here now, close close to Iran. And the Iranians, too, are signaling that Iran will act if it is attacked. We spoke to an analyst who looks at Iranian messaging. Take a listen to the way that he describes the way the Iranians are positioning.
The regime is taking the threat from the U.S. very seriously, it appears. They appear to be preparing their own people to go to war. They are launching propaganda campaigns depicting U.S. aircraft carriers floating in seas of blood.
So from one perspective, Gabe, both sides are threatening each other in order to get the other side to flex, to bend in the negotiations. The other position, and people worry and people think that actually the negotiations, if they fail, there will be strikes, there will be a conflict of some nature.
And now, Kira, you touched on this briefly, but Special Envoy Witkoff will also be participating in trilateral talks with Russia and Ukraine, as we said. Do you anticipate the two sides will be able to make any kind of meaningful progress here towards a peace deal?
Well, it depends on who you ask. The Russians think that they can make meaningful progress, but what they mean by that is to get to economic relations, trade agreements with the US, possibly the removal of sanctions, to almost step past the conflict itself. The expectation that there can be some kind of an agreement on the ground is looking really shaky right now. Both sides, both Kyiv and Moscow, are signaling that they are prepared to compromise, not least because that's what President Trump wants. But there are real hurdles in those negotiations too, not least the question of who keeps territory, and if they don't, what happens to that territory. I mean, that is a fundamental issue, and right now it's hard to see how that can be resolved.
Yeah, and finally, Kira, I also want to ask you about this new analysis by European officials that found that Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who died 2 years ago today, was in fact poisoned with a deadly toxin. What more do we know about that?
Yeah, this is a deadly toxin from a rare kind of frog. The Europeans effectively are saying that only the Russians, and remember, Alexei Navalny was in Russian custody, only the Russians, and was in Russia initially when he was first poisoned, that only the Russians would have the capability to use this poison on Alexei Navalny. And they also suggest that it's the kind of thing that only a sophisticated operation like the Russians would be able to administer. So that's the allegation. The Russians entirely deny it. Interestingly, when Alexei Navalny died, I asked President Putin himself about it, and in his answer to me, he suggested that he had asked for Navalny to be freed and that then he had died, almost as if it's a coincidence. That's the kind of way that the Russians have been describing it throughout the time since Navalny's passing. But certainly Putin hated Navalny, wouldn't even mention his name, and now the Europeans say effectively the Putin regime killed him.
A coincidence. Keir Simmons reporting live for us. Keir, thank you. And up next, the Attorney General says that all of the Epstein files have now been released, just as the Justice Department also faces ongoing bipartisan criticism over its handling of the case. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. In a new letter to Congress, Attorney General Pam Bondi says the DOJ has released all of the files related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. That letter also includes a list of more than 300 names of government officials and so-called politically exposed persons who appeared in the files. But the two lawmakers who have been leading the push for the release of the Epstein files remain critical of the DOJ. Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna said by releasing the hundreds of names, the DOJ was purposefully muddying the waters on who was a predator and who was simply mentioned. And Republican Congressman Thomas Massie expressing doubt in Attorney General Bondi over her handling of the files.
Do you still have confidence in Pam Bondi as Attorney General?
I don't think Pam Bondi has confidence in Pam Bondi. She wasn't confident enough to engage in anything but name-calling in a hearing. And so, no, I don't have confidence in her.
Joining me now is NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach. Gary, thank you so much for joining me here. Look, Attorney General Pam Bondi, as we said, she says that all files have been released. You just heard Thomas Massie. He's not satisfied, and some Republicans aren't. Other Republicans aren't either. What happens next here?
So there's two reasons why Thomas Massie and some others are not satisfied. One, because he believes there's some over-redactions in these millions and millions of files. He believes there's some names that are redacted that shouldn't be. He believes there's some pages that are redacted that shouldn't be. He also says he believes there should be criminal charges put against some people by the Department of Justice. This Department of Justice has said they have no interest in doing any of that.
So do you think that this goes away for the administration anytime soon? They've already had prominent people within the administration, looped into these Epstein files. We got the revelations a couple days ago about Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, in addition to everything else that was already out there. Is this something that goes away for the Trump administration anytime soon?
You're seeing Lutnick, you're seeing Bannon, at varying levels of involvement, by the way. Lutnick had apparently one lunch on the island. Bannon has had years' worth of text messages.
And he says it's all because of the documentary he was conducting.
For sure,
yes.
for sure. And in terms of whether or not this goes away, President Trump believes he's been 100% exonerated. He believes there's no reason for this to continue. He says they're all out, and this should be game over for the Epstein files and moving on to the next big administration issue.
Now, look, that's the administration. Yeah. Outside of the Trump administration, we continue to see the impact of the release of the Epstein files in Great Britain, for example. It's had a huge impact over there. Now we're, seeing some business executives, Hollywood mogul Casey Wasserman, the Hyatt executive, Thomas Pritzker. What can you tell us about them?
Yeah, if your name was in one of these files, you've probably released a statement, and you may have actually resigned from your position. Casey Wasserman, who was the head of that talent agency, has stepped down, saying he was causing a distraction to his agency. Kathy Rumler, former Obama official, is leaving her big role at Goldman Sachs, saying she didn't want to be a distraction. And Thomas Pritzker, who's the chairman of the board of the Hyatt Hotels, also said he's stepping down. Now, none of these people have been criminally accused of any sort of wrongdoing, but certainly their careers are now in jeopardy.
Gary Grumbach, thank you so much for breaking it all down for us. We appreciate it. And after the break, the truth is out there. Former President Barack Obama tells a podcaster that aliens are real, and he's set the internet on fire. You're watching Meet the Press now. Stay with us. And welcome back. And what feels like a sign of the times we're living in, a traditionally bipartisan meeting between the nation's governors and the president has taken a partisan turn. Last week, officials with the National Governors Association said that President Trump was only planning on including Republican governors in that annual meeting at the White House. The president denied that on social media, saying invitations were sent to all the governors from both parties for the gathering on Friday, except for Democratic governors Wes Moore of Maryland and Jared Polis of Colorado. The NGA says all governors were invited to the business meeting, including Moore and Polis, though throughout the saga, President Trump has also repeatedly criticized the Republican chair of the Governors Association, Kevin Stitt, over the dispute. So now we turn to the panel. NBC's Mel Zanona back with me, and joining us now, Tia Mitchell, Washington Bureau Chief for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thank you both for joining me here. Look, Tia, it appears the president has reversed course here, at least on some of this. A source confirms to NBC that as of Wednesday, Governor Wes Moore had received an invite, but what should we make of Trump's initial push to keep Governors Moore and Polis out of this meeting?
Yeah, it seems like the initial, because at the end of the day, most people at home are not going to be moved one way or another about this meeting in the Oval Office. But yeah, I think the perception is that Trump didn't want these governors in meeting with him. That could be critical. That might push back and make it uncomfortable for him.
Mel, why pick this fight now with these two governors? Why not just hold this meeting and no big deal? Why draw attention to this?
He can't help himself, first of all. And I think these feuds are fresh on his mind. On Colorado, he has been obsessed with Colorado, as you know, Gabe, trying to pressure the state to release one of his allies from prison who's in there after trying to interfere in the 2020 election. And then with Governor Wes Moore, this is someone he has gone toe-to-toe with. And not to mention, he could be a Democratic presidential contender. So maybe that's why Trump is more motivated in attacking him. But I think that could also backfire because it has really only served to elevate Governor Wes Moore.
Right. And speaking of that, that. Tia, Governor Moore has raised the fact that not only is he the vice chair, but also the nation's only black governor. So he stopped short of speaking about the president's intent, but can that be ignored here?
Well, I don't think it can, particularly given President Trump's recent pattern of attacking particularly perceived enemies who are people of color, women, of course, the racist video of the Obamas. I do think race matters, because even if it wasn't President Trump's intent to go after Moore because of his race, you can't ignore that is, it still is what it is.
Right. And Mel, this all comes on the heels of President Obama actually responding to that racist video that President Trump posted that was widely condemned. He did respond in a podcast over the weekend that aired over the weekend. Let's listen to that.
There's this sort of clown show that's happening in social media and on television. And what is true is that there doesn't seem to be any shame about this among people who used to feel like you had to have some sort of decorum and a sense of propriety and respect for the office.
You know, Mel, it's very interesting there. Obama choosing his words very carefully, as he often does. He did not mention Donald Trump. He did not say the word racist in there. But what are people making about this response?
It was a very Obama-esque response. It was measured, it was sharp, and he's not giving Trump the satisfaction of even saying his name. It's also notable because I think it's so different than how Democrats in today's party talk about Trump, not afraid to use swear words. But I will say, anyone who watched the NBA All-Star game this weekend saw that Obama was willing to go after Reggie Miller, a former member of the Indiana Pacers. So as a Chicago Bulls fan, I just had to point
Well,
that
of
one
course, Obama, you know, when it comes to basketball, he's willing to
doesn't
leave it
hold
all out there. He does not hold back. Tia, speaking about the former president, how relevant is his voice when it comes to Democrats, preparing for the midterms, speaking about the Trump administration's immigration enforcement policies? He called them dangerous as part of that podcast. Does Obama's voice make a difference with independent voters now?
I definitely, it makes a difference with the base. And I do think Obama still remains an influential figure in American politics. But I do think as the years go on and he's further and further removed from the White House and he gets older and less in the public eye, I do think his influence continues to decrease. But still, he is a leader of the Democratic Party. He is influential in the Democratic Party. He can draw a big crowd still. He can raise money or help out a candidate if he so chooses.
Right, and I thought it was interesting in that podcast, too. He talked about his age. He's 64, but he said Democrats should do well by perhaps looking, a little younger. So I thought those comments were interesting as well. Before we go, though, I want to talk about some other major news that the former president made on that podcast. Let's listen.
Are aliens real?
They're real, but I haven't seen them, and they're not being kept in, what is it?
Area 51.
Area 51.
Okay, so that set the internet on fire. He later needed to clarify that statement last night. This was the statement he posted. He said, "I saw no evidence during my presidency that extraterrestrials have made contact with us." Really? So, Mel, look. We had so much else going on in the world. We got other 2028 hopefuls trying to make their splash in Munich. The internet goes nuts over Obama's statement. What does that say? Is the political world looking for any sort of distraction right now?
Well, I also think it's not too late for one of those 2028 contenders to come out and say that they have seen some evidence of
exclusive
alien
evidence
about clearly that would get so many voters because, as you said, the internet was just on fire over these comments. And what's so interesting about this subject is it actually does not cut across party lines. On Capitol Hill, you have everyone from the far left to the far right trying to come together, holding hearings on this issue, pushing for more information to see what else might be out there, Gabe.
Do you think President Trump weighs into this national debate about aliens?
If he thinks it's hot, he's going to weigh in. And so he might not do it right now because the last thing he wants to do is be perceived as following behind Obama.
Oh, that's true.
But I do think, just like the rest of us, he's intrigued and interested in the topic. We've seen the hearings on Capitol Hill. And I do think Obama's saying, not that he's seen aliens, but as president, the briefings and whatever he has seen has convinced him they're out there. I do think that's enough to get people even more intrigued.
Well, the truth is surely out there. Thank you both so much for joining me. And you know what? It's something else to talk about on this President's Day. We really appreciate it. And thank you at home for watching. I'm Gabe Gutierrez. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. And of course, there's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.